My father's dismissive voice cut through the laughter at our Christmas dinner table. "How's your little computer business, mija?" he asked, while proudly describing my brother David's real career at Microsoft. What Dad didn't know in 24 hours, the $180 million announcement would change everything he thought he knew about his daughter's success. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started. Sitting in my Tesla outside the familiar Adobe-style house in Phoenix. Christmas lights twinkled along the roofline, casting red and green shadows across the desert landscaping my mother had carefully maintained for 30 years. The scent of roasting turkey and fresh tamales drifted through my partially open window, mixing with the crisp December air that made Arizona winters almost bearable. I checked my phone one more time. The notification from my legal team still glowed on the screen, confirming what I'd worked toward for months. TechCorp Industries acquisition finalized. Press release scheduled for December 26th. $180 million. The numbers felt surreal, even after building my company from nothing over the past 12 years. Through the living room window, I could see my older brother David, gesturing animatedly to our father, probably explaining some technical achievement from his job at Microsoft. Dad's face lit up with the same pride I'd watched him display at every family gathering since David graduated from Harvard with his computer science degree. The golden son, as I'd learned to think of him, though never with real malice. David had simply chosen the path our father understood. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my business partner and closest friend since our Arizona State days. The message was brief but supportive. The board meeting went perfectly. Enjoy your family time. You've earned this moment. If only she knew how complicated family time had become. I grabbed the small pile of wrapped presents from my passenger seat and stepped out into the evening air. The sound of my car door closing seemed too loud in the quiet neighborhood, where I'd learned to ride my bike, where I'd scraped my knees on the sidewalk, where I'd announced at 17 that I wanted to study computers instead of the nursing program my father had suggested. That conversation felt like yesterday, though it had happened over 15 years ago. Dad had been sitting in his favorite recliner, the same one that probably still dominated their living room, reading through Boeing engineering manuals even after his retirement. When I told him about my interest in programming, he'd look at me over his reading glasses with that expression I'd come to know, well, gentle disappointment mixed with paternal concern. "Emma Mia," he'd said, in his careful English, the accent from his childhood in Tucson still coloring certain words. "Computers are fine for hobbies, but you need something stable, something real. Look at your brother David. He's studying real engineering, real technology. That's a career that will take care of you." Even then, David had been the example I was supposed to follow. I walked up the familiar flagstone path, past the small nativity scene my mother set up every December, past the luminarias lining the walkway. The paper bags glowed softly, weighted down with sand and lit by small candles, a tradition she'd learned from her own mother decades ago. Everything about this house whispered of family history, of expectations carefully maintained across generations. The front door opened before I could knock. "Emma, baby." My mother called out, her voice warm with genuine affection. She pulled me into one of her fierce hugs, the kind that had comforted me through skinned knees and teenage heartbreak, and every disappointment in between. "You look beautiful. How was the drive from Scottsdale?" "Traffic wasn't bad," I said, breathing in her familiar scent of vanilla perfume and kitchen spices. I could hear voices from the dining room, the sound of my extended family already gathered around the table my grandfather had built by hand 40 years ago. "Your father's been asking about you," Mom said as she led me toward the kitchen. "He wants to hear about your little business. David's been telling him about some big project at Microsoft." My little business. The phrase hit exactly the way it always did, like a small stone thrown with just enough force to sting. I'd stopped correcting the description years ago. My little business now employed 150 people across 3 countries. My little business had just completed the largest acquisition in my industry this year. But tonight, surrounded by the warmth of my childhood home and the expectations that had shaped me, I was still Roberto Rodriguez's younger daughter, still the one who'd chosen the uncertain path. I followed Mom into the kitchen where my grandmother stood at the stove, stirring a pot of pozole with the same wooden spoon she'd used for as long as I could remember. Abuela Carmen looked up when I entered, her dark eyes sharp and knowing, despite her 84 years. "Mia," she said, setting down the spoon and opening her arms. Her hug felt different from my mother's, layered with understanding that went deeper than words. She pulled back and looked at me carefully the way she always did, as if she could read stories written across my face. "You have news," she said quietly, so only I could hear. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good news," she continued, and it wasn't a question. "The best," I whispered. She smiled then, the kind of smile that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said loud enough for my mother to hear. He always said the Rodriguez women were born to build empires. From the dining room, I could hear my father's voice rising above the others, explaining something technical to my Uncle Miguel. David's laughter punctuated whatever story was being told. The sound of family, of home, of belonging to something larger than myself. But also the sound of a world where my achievements would always be measured against David's, where my choices would always need justification, where my success would always be qualified with words like little and hobby and cute. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the secret I carried. Tomorrow's press release would change everything. But tonight, I was still the daughter who'd disappointed her father by dropping out of college, still the sister who'd chosen uncertainty over stability, still the granddaughter who'd inherited her grandmother's stubborn independence and her grandfather's quiet determination. Abuela squeezed my hand once more before returning to her cooking. The gesture felt like a blessing, a reminder that some kinds of support run deeper than approval, some kinds of love exist independent of understanding. It was time to join my family for Christmas dinner. Walking into that dining room brought back a flood of memories I'd spent years trying to compartmentalize. The same family photos lined the mantelpiece, chronicling decades of Rodriguez celebrations, graduations, and milestones. David's Harvard diploma still held the place of honor, framed in expensive wood next to his high school valedictorian certificate. My ASU dropout story, on the other hand, lived in family whispers and careful redirections. I settled into my usual chair, the one I'd occupied since childhood, and let the familiar rhythm of family conversation wash over me. But my mind kept drifting back to those early years, to the garage apartment in Tempe where everything had started. 2012 felt like a lifetime ago. I was 22, armed with nothing but a fierce determination to prove that my decision to leave college hadn't been the massive mistake everyone believed it was. My Target uniform hung in the closet of that cramped one-bedroom apartment, the red polo shirt and khaki pants that represented my daytime reality, while my nights belonged to something entirely different. The garage came with the rental, a concrete box barely big enough for a car, but it became my sanctuary. I'd set up a folding card table from Walmart, positioned my ancient Dell laptop where it could catch the weak Wi-Fi signal from the main house, and taught myself to code by the glow of a single overhead bulb. YouTube tutorials became my professors. Stack Overflow became my textbook. Coffee became my lifeline. Those first 2 years blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and stubborn hope. My days started at 6 a.m. with inventory counts and customer service at Target, where I smiled and restocked shelves and pretended not to notice when former classmates came through my checkout line with their college textbooks and internship stories. My nights started at 11 p.m. after I'd eaten whatever microwave dinner I could afford and settled into the plastic chair that left permanent indentations on my legs. Learning to program felt like learning a secret language that could unlock doors I didn't even know existed. HTML and CSS came first, basic and logical, like learning the alphabet. JavaScript followed, trickier and more nuanced, requiring the kind of problem-solving that reminded me why I'd loved math before family expectations steered me toward more traditional paths. Python opened up possibilities I'd never imagined, connecting databases and automating processes in ways that felt almost magical. The loneliness was the hardest part. My Target coworkers were friendly enough, but they couldn't understand why I spent my breaks reading programming forums instead of scrolling through social media. My college friends had moved on to internships and study groups and social lives that no longer included the girl who'd thrown away her education for what everyone called a pipe dream. Dad visited sometimes, usually on Sunday afternoons when Mom sent him over with leftover pozole or tamales. He'd sit awkwardly on my tiny couch, looking around the apartment with barely concealed worry, his engineer's mind trying to calculate exactly how far his daughter had fallen from the path he'd envisioned for her. "Mija," he'd say, his voice gentle but persistent. "It's not too late to go back to school. You could finish your degree in nursing, get a good job with benefits, stability. This computer thing, It's interesting as a hobby, but it's not a career for someone like you, someone like me. The phrase always stung, loaded with implications about gender and class. David never had to hear about someone like him. David's choices were celebrated, encouraged, funded without question. But I kept going, driven by something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was stubbornness inherited from Abuela Carmen, who'd built a successful alterations business from her dining room table after immigrating from Sonora with nothing but sewing skills and unshakable determination. Maybe it was the quiet satisfaction I felt when a piece of code finally worked, when hours of debugging culminated in that perfect moment when everything clicked into place. My first real breakthrough came in late 2014. A local restaurant owner named Mrs. Patterson had been struggling with inventory management, manually tracking supplies and sales in spiral notebooks that frequently got lost or damaged. I offered to build her a simple system for $500, more money than I'd ever made outside of my target paychecks. I spent 3 weeks building that system, learning database management and user interface design as I went, staying up until dawn to troubleshoot problems I'd never encountered before. When Mrs. Patterson saw the finished product, when she realized she could track everything with a few clicks instead of hours of manual calculation, her face lit up with the kind of joy that reminded me why I'd chosen this impossible path. Word spread slowly through Phoenix's small business community. The flower shop on McDowell Road, the auto repair place where Uncle Miguel got his truck serviced, a boutique in Old Town Scottsdale that needed help with online sales. Each project taught me something new. Each satisfied customer felt like validation that maybe, possibly, I wasn't completely deluding myself. By 2016, I was making enough from freelance work to quit Target, though I kept that victory quiet during family gatherings, where David's promotion stories dominated the conversation. That same year, Sarah Chen reached out through Facebook, my former roommate from the single semester I'd completed at ASU before everything fell apart. Sarah had graduated with a business degree and was working at a marketing firm in Phoenix, but she'd been following my small projects through mutual friends. She showed up at my apartment one Saturday morning with coffee and a proposition that would change everything. "You're thinking too small," she said, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor with her laptop open between us. "These small businesses need what you're building, but they need more than custom solutions. They need something scalable, something that grows with them." The idea of TechFlow Solutions was born that morning, sketched out on napkins between sips of coffee that had grown cold hours earlier. Sarah would handle the business side, marketing and operations, and all the corporate machinery I'd never learned to navigate. I would focus on the technology, building something bigger than individual client projects, something that could serve hundreds of businesses instead of dozens. We filed the incorporation papers in late 2016, officially becoming a real company with business licenses and tax identification numbers and all the legitimacy that came with legal recognition. Dad's reaction was predictably mixed when I told him at Christmas that year. "It's good that you have a partner," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Someone with business experience to keep you grounded. Just remember, mija, most startups fail within the first few years. It's important to have a backup plan." David, meanwhile, had just accepted his position at Microsoft, complete with stock options and health insurance and all the markers of success that made sense to our parents. His congratulations felt genuine, but I caught him glancing at my business cards with something that looked like confusion, as if he couldn't quite reconcile his little sister with words like chief technology officer. 2017 became our proof of concept year, the time when dreams either solidified into reality or collapsed under the weight of practical challenges. We moved into a small office space in Tempe, barely large enough for 2 desks and a coffee maker, but it felt like a palace compared to my garage setup. That Christmas dinner, I'd tried to explain our progress to the family gathered around this same table where I sat now. Revenue projections, client acquisition strategies, the technical challenges of building scalable software architecture. But my words seemed to bounce off polite smiles and redirected conversations, while David's stories about Microsoft's corporate culture and project management methodologies held everyone's rapt attention. The contrast was impossible to ignore. David represented everything our family understood about success, measurable and predictable and backed by institutional credibility. I represented uncertainty, risk, the kind of ventures that excited some people and terrified others. But I'd learned something important during those years of building TechFlow from nothing. Success doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it grows quietly, steadily, one satisfied customer at a time, until suddenly, what everyone dismissed as impossible becomes undeniably real. The sound of David's laughter brought me back to the present, to the Christmas dinner where everything was about to change. March 2020. Changed everything. Though at first, it felt like the end of the world I'd been building. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly projections in our small Tempe office. Sarah paced behind her desk phone pressed to her ear, her normally calm demeanor cracking as client after client canceled contracts. Small businesses were shuttering overnight. Restaurant owners were laying off entire staff, and our carefully cultivated customer base was evaporating like morning dew in the Arizona sun. "We're going to lose everything," Sarah said after hanging up with our biggest client, a chain of boutique fitness studios that had just filed for bankruptcy. That's $18,000 in monthly recurring revenue gone, just like that. I stared at our whiteboard covered with growth projections and expansion plans, numbers that suddenly looked like wishful thinking instead of achievable goals. Everything we'd built over 4 years felt fragile, temporary, dependent on a world that no longer existed. But then something unexpected happened. The phone started ringing again, but this time the conversations were different. Business owners weren't calling to cancel services. They were calling because they desperately needed help managing the sudden explosion in online orders, the overwhelming shift from in-person transactions to digital commerce happening virtually overnight. Mrs. Patterson, the restaurant owner who'd been my first real client 6 years earlier, called in a panic. "Emma, I need your help," she said, her voice tight with stress. "I've got orders coming in through 3 different delivery apps. My inventory system can't handle the volume, and I'm losing track of everything. Can your software help me figure out how to ship meals efficiently across the web?" Entire Phoenix metro area. That conversation sparked something. Sarah and I spent the next 72 hours redesigning our entire business model, pivoting from general small business management to laser-focused logistics optimization for e-commerce operations. We called it our COVID pivot, though it felt more like a complete reinvention of everything we'd built. The technical challenges were immense. E-commerce logistics required algorithms that could process thousands of variables simultaneously, shipping costs, delivery windows, inventory locations, customer preferences, traffic patterns, weather delays. I found myself working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and the adrenaline that comes from solving problems nobody had faced before. Our tiny office became a war room. Sarah handled client communications and market research, while I dove deep into machine learning frameworks, teaching myself artificial intelligence concepts that felt impossibly complex, but absolutely necessary. We were competing against Amazon's logistics systems, against billion-dollar infrastructure, with nothing but determination and a credit line that kept me awake at night. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a Thursday in late April. I'd been debugging a routing algorithm for 6 straight hours, my eyes burning from staring at code, when suddenly everything clicked. The system I'd built could optimize delivery routes across multiple carriers, predict shipping delays before they happened, and automatically adjust inventory allocation based on real-time demand patterns. I called Sarah immediately, too excited to care about the hour. "It works," I said as soon as she answered. "The optimization engine actually works." The next morning, we demonstrated the system to a mid-sized retailer in Scottsdale that had been struggling with fulfillment delays. When they saw delivery times improve by 30% within the first week, word spread through Phoenix's business community like wildfire. By summer 2020, our revenue had jumped from $50,000 to over $2 million annually. We hired our first full-time employees, moved to a larger office space, and started fielding calls from companies across Arizona, then California, then nationwide. The pandemic that had initially threatened to destroy our business had instead created the exact market conditions where our technology could shine. But success came with complications I hadn't anticipated. During a family video call in July, David mentioned that Microsoft had fast-tracked development of their own logistics optimization. His team was working on partnership contracts with major e-commerce companies, building solutions that would compete directly with the systems Sarah and I were developing. "It's fascinating work," David said, his face pixelated through the poor connection. We're integrating with existing enterprise infrastructure, leveraging Microsoft's cloud computing resources to handle massive-scale operations. The potential market is enormous. Dad nodded approvingly from his spot on the family room couch. That's real technology work, he said. Corporate backing, established infrastructure, job security even during uncertain times. Emma's little project is nice, but it can't compare to the resources Microsoft brings to these challenges. I stayed quiet during that call, but something shifted inside me. For the first time, David and I weren't just siblings with different career paths. We were direct competitors, building similar solutions from opposite directions. He had corporate resources and institutional credibility. I had agility and hunger and the kind of desperation that comes from betting everything on an uncertain outcome. The professional rivalry became personal during a family barbecue in September. David had flown in from Seattle for Mom's birthday, and the conversation inevitably turned to work. He described Microsoft's partnership strategy, the enterprise clients they were targeting, the massive processing capacity of their cloud infrastructure. Of course, David said, glancing in my direction with something that looked like condescension, small-scale solutions have their place in the market. But when you're talking about real logistics optimization, about handling millions of transactions daily, you need the kind of infrastructure that only established tech companies can provide. The implication was clear. TechFlow might be successful within our niche, but we were still playing in the minor leagues while David worked in the majors. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom after the family had gone to sleep, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my career. Instead of feeling intimidated by Microsoft's resources, I would use their size against them. Large corporations moved slowly, required extensive approval processes, couldn't adapt quickly to changing market conditions. Those weren't advantages in the fast-moving world of e-commerce logistics. They were vulnerabilities. Over the following months, I pushed TechFlow harder than ever before. We developed AI algorithms that could learn and adapt in real time, something Microsoft's enterprise infrastructure couldn't match. We offered personalized solutions for mid-market companies that were too small for Microsoft's attention, but too sophisticated for basic logistics software. By December 2020, we were processing over $2 billion in annual e-commerce logistics, handling complex routing decisions for companies across North America. Our client list included retailers that David's team was actively trying to court, creating an increasingly direct competition between his corporate approach and my startup methodology. The success felt surreal, but it also felt dangerous. Every milestone we achieved seemed to widen the gap between the family's perception of my work and the reality of what TechFlow had become. David's Microsoft stories still dominated dinner conversations, while my achievements were met with polite interest and subtle reminders about the importance of stability and backup plans. I was building something that could revolutionize supply chain management. But in my family's eyes, I was still the daughter who dropped out of college to pursue a risky hobby. That perception was about to change dramatically, though I didn't know it yet. Christmas 2020 was celebrated over video calls due to pandemic restrictions. But I could already see the questions forming in Dad's eyes, the growing confusion about how my little computer business was surviving and apparently thriving while established companies struggled. The foundation was set for everything that would follow. The discovery came buried in a stack of legal documents I was reviewing for our Series B funding preparation in early 2021. Sarah had spread investor agreements across our conference table, organized by date and dollar amount. When I noticed an entry that made me stop cold, Carmen Rodriguez, $25,000, investment date September 2019. My grandmother had invested in TechFlow and I'd never known. I called Sarah over immediately, pointing to the document with a shaking finger. "Did you know about this?" Sarah studied the paperwork, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding. "She must have gone through our attorney directly," she said quietly. The investment was structured as a convertible note, probably to keep it simple for someone who wasn't familiar with venture. Capital terms, $25,000 for Abuela Carmen, who'd spent her entire adult life carefully saving every penny from her alterations business, who still clipped coupons and reused aluminum foil that represented a fortune. It represented years of setting aside $10 and $20 bills, of choosing generic brands at the grocery store, of mending her own clothes instead of buying new ones. I drove to her house that evening, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure how to ask. She lived in the same small bungalow in Central Phoenix, where she'd raised my father and his siblings, where she'd built her sewing business one custom dress at a time after arriving from Sonora with nothing but her singer machine and unshakable determination. Abuela was in her kitchen when I arrived, as I'd known she would be. At 84, she still cooked dinner every night, still made fresh tortillas by hand, still insisted that food tasted better when prepared with love instead of convenience. The familiar sense of cumin and cilantro filled the air, reminding me of countless afternoons I'd spent at this same table doing homework while she worked on alterations for neighborhood women. "Mija," she said, looking up from the masa she was kneading. "You look troubled. Sit. Tell your abuela what's weighing on your heart." I pulled the investment document from my purse, setting it on the worn formica table between us. "Abuela, why didn't you tell me?" She glanced at the papers, then continued working the dough with steady, practiced movements. Her hands showed every year of her life, marked by countless needle pricks and stained by decades of fabric dyes, but they moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her own capabilities. "Because you would have said no," she replied simply. "You would have worried about taking money from an old woman, about the risk of losing my savings. You would have let your conscience stop you from taking what you needed to succeed." The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. She was absolutely right. If I'd known about her offer in 2019, when TechFlow was still struggling to establish credibility, when every month felt like a battle for survival, I would have refused her investment. The guilt of potentially losing her life savings would have paralyzed me. But Abuela, $25,000, that's your emergency fund, your security, everything you've saved for retirement. She stopped kneading and looked at me with the expression I remembered from childhood, the one that appeared whenever I underestimated either her wisdom or her strength. "Mija, I didn't build my business to have money sitting in the bank when I die. I built it to invest in the future, to give my family opportunities I never had." She moved to the stove, checking the pot of beans that had been simmering since afternoon. "When I came to this country in 1962, she continued, I had nothing but a sewing machine and the dream of building something better for my children. Your grandfather worked construction during the day while I took in alterations at night. We saved every penny, sacrificed everything, so Roberto could go to college and become an engineer. I watched her move around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd perfected these routines over decades. Every gesture was purposeful, economical, the result of a lifetime spent making the most of limited resources. "Your father is a good man," she said, ladling beans into a bowl and setting it in front of me. "But he thinks success looks like stability, like following established paths that lead to predictable outcomes. He sees risk as danger, change as threat. That's the immigrant mentality, mija. When you come from nothing, you hold tight to whatever security you can find." She sat across from me, her dark eyes bright with intelligence that age hadn't dimmed. "But you," she continued, "you have the entrepreneur spirit. I saw it when you were 8 years old, selling friendship bracelets to the neighbors for 50 cents each. I saw it when you tutored other kids in high school and saved every dollar to buy your first computer. I saw it when you dropped out of college because you knew there was a different path even when everyone told you it was wrong." The memory of those friendship bracelets made me smile despite the emotional weight of the conversation. I'd been so proud of that little business, setting up a card table in the front yard every Saturday morning, creating colorful patterns that other kids wanted to buy. Dad had called it cute, but Abuela had helped me organize my inventory and count my profits like it was a serious enterprise. "When you started TechFlow," she said, "I watched you work 18-hour days. Watched you believe in something when nobody else understood what you were building. I knew you had inherited the same fire that brought me from Mexico to Phoenix, with nothing but hope and determination. That's when I decided to invest." Tears were threatening, now hot and unexpected. "But what if we had failed? What if you had lost everything?" "Then I would have lost it supporting my granddaughter's dream instead of watching it die from lack of belief." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Money can be earned back, mija. Regret lasts forever." The kitchen fell quiet except for the gentle bubbling of beans on the stove and the distant sound of traffic on McDowell Road. I thought about all the nights I'd spent coding in that garage apartment, fueled by instant coffee and stubborn refusal to give up. I'd never known that Abuela's faith was backing me up, that her life savings were invested in my uncertain future. The conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing with a text from my cousin Sophia, Dad's brother's daughter who'd just started her freshman year at Arizona State. The message was brief but loaded with family drama. Uncle Miguel and I are fighting with Dad about my major. He wants me to switch from computer science to business administration. Says tech isn't stable for women. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, learning about her secret investment in my technology company, while another generation of Rodriguez women faced the same skepticism about pursuing careers in tech. I showed that this is why I invested in you, she said, not just for the money, though I believe you'll make me wealthy beyond my dreams. I invested because someone needs to prove to this family that women can succeed in technology, that taking risks can lead to extraordinary rewards. She stood and moved to the refrigerator, pulling out ingredients for the salsa she made fresh every evening. Your cousin Sophia needs to see what's possible when a Rodriguez woman refuses to accept limitations. Your father needs to understand that stability isn't the only path to success. Your brother needs to learn that corporate jobs aren't the only way to build something meaningful in technology. As I watched her dice tomatoes with practiced precision, I realized that Abuela's investment hadn't just been about funding TechFlow's growth. It had been about funding a vision of what our family could become, about proving that the entrepreneur spirit she'd brought from Mexico could flourish in ways that traditional immigrant success stories couldn't imagine. The weight of that responsibility felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Outside, the sun was setting over the Phoenix Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me why I'd never wanted to leave this desert city despite all the opportunities that might have awaited elsewhere. Tomorrow I would call Sophia and offer whatever support I could. Tonight, I would sit with my grandmother and listen to more stories about building businesses from nothing, about betting everything on uncertain dreams, about the courage it takes to invest in the future when the present feels impossibly fragile. June 2022 brought the phone call that would transform TechFlow from a promising startup into a legitimate industry player. Sarah burst into my office at our new Scottsdale headquarters, her face flushed with excitement and disbelief. Emma, she said, closing the door behind her. Sequoia Capital wants to lead our Series B round, $50 million, $200 million valuation. The numbers felt abstract, almost fictional. 3 years earlier, I'd been celebrating 5-figure months as major victories. Now, venture capitalists were offering more money than I'd ever imagined. Possible validation that our logistics optimization platform had evolved into something genuinely revolutionary. The funding announcement made TechCrunch's front page, complete with my photo and a detailed analysis of how TechFlow's artificial intelligence algorithms were disrupting traditional supply chain management. We were processing logistics for 75 enterprise clients across North America, our systems handling over $2 billion in annual e-commerce transactions. Nike had become our flagship customer after our algorithms reduced their shipping costs by 35% while improving delivery times across their Western distribution network. Walmart followed 6 months later, impressed by case studies showing how our platform could predict and prevent supply chain disruptions before they impacted customer experience. Our team had grown to 75 employees, spread across offices in Phoenix, Austin, and Toronto. Engineers who'd previously worked for Amazon and Google were joining TechFlow, attracted by the opportunity to build next-generation logistics technology without the bureaucratic constraints of massive corporations. But success in the business world didn't translate to recognition in my family circle. I announced the Series B funding during a backyard barbecue at my parents' house, choosing the moment carefully when conversation had lulled and everyone was relaxed from Dad's famous margaritas. The extended family was gathered for my cousin Miguel's graduation from ASU, the same university I'd left 10 years earlier. We just closed our Series B funding round, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. $50 million from Sequoia Capital. Our valuation is now $200 million. The reaction was a mix of polite congratulations and confused glances. Uncle Roberto Miguel's father asked what Series B meant. Aunt Rosa wanted to know if that was real money or just investment promises. Dad nodded approvingly, but quickly shifted the conversation back to David's recent promotion to senior software architect. a title that apparently carried more weight than Chief Technology Officer of a company worth 9 figures. That's wonderful, mija, Mom said, patting my arm with the same gentle encouragement she'd offered when I was 8 years old selling friendship bracelets. But these investment things can be so uncertain. David's salary and benefits are guaranteed stable. That's real security. The contrast was impossible to ignore. David's corporate achievement merited detailed discussion about career, advancement, and professional recognition. My funding announcement was treated like interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. News something that might disappear as quickly as it had appeared. Later that evening, while helping clean up paper plates and leftover potato salad, I overheard Dad talking to Uncle Miguel near the grill. "These tech startups are like lottery tickets," he said, scraping charcoal residue with more force than necessary. "Exciting when you win, but most of them fail within 5 years. David's path is more sensible. Steady growth, corporate backing, predictable career progression." The conversation stung more than I'd expected. Here I was, running a company that competed directly with Amazon's logistics, infrastructure, that processed supply chain decisions for some of America's largest retailers, and my father still viewed it as gambling rather than legitimate business. Success. Sarah found me on the patio afterward, staring out at the desert landscape that stretched towards South Mountain. "You okay?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me. I told her about the conversation I'd overheard, about the frustration of achieving milestones that somehow didn't register as real accomplishments in my family's eyes. Sarah listened quietly, then offered a perspective that would shape my thinking for years to come. "Emma," she said, "you're seeking validation from people who don't understand what we're building. Your dad measures success by corporate hierarchies and pension plans because that's the world he knows. He can't recognize the value of what you've created because it doesn't fit his definition of legitimate achievement." She was right, but that didn't make the dismissal any less painful. I'd spent my entire adult life proving that dropping out of college hadn't been a mistake, that the unconventional path could lead to extraordinary destinations. Every metric suggested I'd succeeded beyond my wildest early expectations. Yet family gatherings still felt like exercises in explaining why my choices hadn't been completely irresponsible. The business continued growing at a pace that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. By fall 2022, we were processing logistics for companies across multiple industries. Fashion, retailers optimizing seasonal inventory distribution, electronics manufacturers managing complex global supply chains, food delivery services coordinating last-mile logistics across major metropolitan areas. Our artificial intelligence platform had evolved beyond basic optimization to predictive analytics that could forecast supply chain disruptions weeks before they occurred. When port congestion threatened to delay Christmas shipments for 3 major retailers, our algorithms automatically rerouted inventory through alternative distribution channels, saving millions in potential lost sales. The technical achievements felt revolutionary, but explaining them to family members who viewed technology as mysterious and potentially dangerous proved increasingly difficult. During Thanksgiving dinner, I attempted to describe how our machine learning systems could analyze thousands of variables simultaneously to optimize shipping routes across continental logistics networks. Dad listened politely, then asked if that was similar to the GPS system in his car. David, visiting from Seattle, jumped in with explanations about Microsoft's enterprise logistics, partnerships, corporate infrastructure, advantages, and the stability that came from working within established technology ecosystems. The subtle competition between David and me had evolved into something more complex as our career paths converged on similar technology challenges. His Microsoft team was building logistics platforms for enterprise clients, directly competing with the solutions TechFlow provided to mid-market companies. We were essentially siblings working on opposite sides of the same industry, transformation. I started noticing tensions in David's stories about work, references to demanding project deadlines and pressure to deliver results that matched the innovation coming from smaller, more agile competitors. Microsoft's size was both an advantage and a limitation, providing resources but requiring approval processes that slowed development cycles. During a quiet moment at Thanksgiving, David asked about TechFlow's client acquisition strategy, his questions more detailed and strategic than casual family conversation, typically warranted. I realized he was studying our approach, possibly looking for insights he could apply to Microsoft's enterprise sales process. The professional rivalry felt strange because it was overlaid with genuine affection. David had always been supportive of my unconventional choices, even when he didn't fully understand them. But now we were competing for similar clients, building comparable solutions, measuring success using metrics that directly compared our respective achievements. By December 2022, TechFlow was processing over $85 million in annual revenue. Our growth trajectory suggesting we'd reach 9 figures within 18 months. We'd expanded our Canadian operations and established a development office in Mexico City, creating the international presence that would later prove crucial for the acquisition opportunity that changed everything. Yet despite these measurable achievements, family gatherings still felt like exercises in translation, attempts to explain why building something from nothing could be just as valuable as climbing established corporate ladders. Dad's pride in David's Microsoft career remained unshakable, while my entrepreneurial success was treated as interesting, but ultimately incomprehensible. I was building an empire, but in my family's eyes, I was still the daughter who'd chosen uncertainty over stability, risk over security, the unknown over the predictable path that led to retirement plans and corporate benefits. That perception was about to shift dramatically, though none of us knew it yet. The foundation was set for the acquisition opportunity that would redefine not just TechFlow's future, but the entire dynamic of family expectations and professional recognition. David arrived for Thanksgiving 2023, looking older than his 36 years, dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that I'd never seen before. He embraced me at the airport with genuine warmth, but something felt different about my usually confident older brother. The drive from Sky Harbor to our parents' house gave us 40 minutes of uninterrupted conversation, the first real talk we'd had since his last visit 8 months earlier. I asked about Microsoft, expecting the usual enthusiastic updates about corporate projects and team expansions. Instead, David stared out the passenger window at the familiar desert landscape and sighed deeply. "It's complicated," he said. "The logistics platform my team has been building for the past 2 years is struggling to compete with newer solutions in the market. Management is asking hard questions about our development timeline and client retention rates." I kept my eyes on the traffic but felt my pulse quicken. TechFlow's rapid growth had been capturing market share from exactly the kind of enterprise solutions David's team was developing. Our artificial intelligence algorithms could adapt and optimize in real time, while traditional corporate platforms required extensive customization and lengthy implementation processes. "We're dealing with some of the most innovative companies in the space." David continued, his voice carrying a frustration I'd rarely heard. "Smaller firms that can move faster, implement changes without corporate approval processes, offer personalized solutions that we simply can't match with Microsoft's infrastructure requirements." The irony wasn't lost on me. David was describing TechFlow without realizing it. Thanksgiving dinner that evening revealed the full extent of the tension David was carrying. He launched into detailed explanations of Microsoft's logistics platform capabilities, emphasizing enterprise-level scalability and corporate backing with an intensity that felt almost defensive. "The enterprise market requires established infrastructure," he said, gesturing with his fork for emphasis while Dad nodded approvingly. "Small startups might generate headlines with their funding rounds, but when Fortune 500 companies need reliable logistics solutions, they choose partners with proven track records and institutional stability." The comment was clearly directed at me, though David maintained the pretense of general industry discussion. I stayed quiet, watching him unconsciously grip his wine glass tighter as he described the challenges of competing against what he called agile, but ultimately unsustainable business models. After dinner, while the family settled into the living room for football, I found David on the back patio smoking a cigarette. I hadn't seen him smoke since college, and the sight of him inhaling deeply while staring at the dark mountains suggested stress levels he wasn't sharing with the family. "When did you start smoking again?" I asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Last month," he admitted. "Don't tell Mom. She thinks I quit for good when I graduated Harvard." We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to the distant sounds of holiday traffic and the coyotes calling from the desert preserve behind our parents' neighborhood. Finally, David spoke without looking at me. "My team is under review," he said quietly. "Microsoft is evaluating whether our logistics platform is worth continued investment, or if they should pivot resources toward acquiring external solutions that are already capturing market share. The admission hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure how to cross. My brother, who'd always represented stability and conventional success, was facing professional uncertainty that might reshape his entire career trajectory. I'm sorry I said meaning it completely. That must be incredibly stressful. David laughed, but there was no humor in it. The funny thing is, the solutions we're competing against are genuinely impressive. I've been studying their approaches, their technical architecture, their client implementation strategies. Some of these companies are doing things we never considered possible with traditional logistics optimization. He took another long drag from his cigarette, the ember glowing orange in the darkness. There's one company in particular that keeps coming up in competitive analyses. TechFlow Solutions, based here in Arizona. They're processing logistics for clients we've been trying to land for months, using artificial intelligence algorithms that adapt faster than anything we can build within Microsoft's development constraints. My stomach dropped. David was unknowingly describing my company as his primary competition. They're good, I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. They're revolutionary, he said with grudging admiration. Whoever built their platform understands logistics optimization at a level that puts most enterprise solutions to shame. Their client case studies show efficiency improvements that our team can't match with current technology constraints. The conversation was interrupted by Uncle Miguel stepping onto the patio, concerned about David's absence from family time. We rejoined the group, but I spent the rest of the evening processing what I'd learned. David wasn't just facing general career pressure. He was specifically struggling to compete with TechFlow's innovations, unknowingly admitting that his little sister had built something his Microsoft team couldn't replicate or surpass. The next morning, over coffee in Mom's kitchen, David opened up further about his professional anxieties. Microsoft's corporate structure was both a blessing and a curse, providing resources and stability while constraining the kind of rapid innovation that startup competitors could achieve. I've been thinking about my next career move, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with unnecessary concentration. Maybe it's time to consider smaller companies, places where I could have more direct impact on product development and strategic direction. The admission revealed something I'd never expected. David envied my entrepreneurial path. For 15 years, he'd been climbing Microsoft's corporate ladder, accumulating titles and benefits and all the markers of conventional success. But he'd also been constrained by approval processes, committee decisions, and the inevitable bureaucracy that came with working for a company employing over 200,000 people worldwide. Meanwhile, I'd been building TechFlow with complete creative control, making strategic decisions in real time, implementing innovations the moment we conceived them. The freedom and agility he was describing as competitive advantages weren't abstract concepts to me. They were the daily reality of running my own company. Later that afternoon, while David was helping Dad with yard work, I called Sarah from my childhood bedroom to discuss what I'd learned. She listened quietly as I described David's professional struggles and his unwitting praise for TechFlow's capabilities. Sarah said, after I finished, "This changes the competitive landscape significantly. If Microsoft's logistics team is struggling to match our innovation, we're not just succeeding in a niche market. We're actually disrupting enterprise solutions at the highest level." The conversation shifted my perspective about TechFlow's position in the industry. I'd been thinking of our success as impressive for a startup, but David's admissions suggested we were genuinely threatening established corporate solutions with superior technology and more effective implementation strategies. That evening, as David prepared to fly back to Seattle, he pulled me aside for a private goodbye. "I want you to know," he said, "that I'm proud of what you've built with your company. I don't always understand the business model or the technical details, but it's clear you've created something significant." The acknowledgement meant more than he could have known, especially coming from someone who'd always represented the conventional success I'd rejected, but it also felt bittersweet, tinged with the knowledge that David's professional struggles were partly the result of competing against solutions I'd helped create. Flying back to Phoenix the next day, I stared out the airplane window at the sprawling desert city where both David and I had learned to dream big despite growing up in a family that valued security over ambition. We'd chosen different paths towards similar destinations, and now those paths were converging in ways that felt both inevitable and complicated. The competitive landscape was about to become much more personal than either of us had anticipated. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late November 2000. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late November 2000. Just as I was reviewing quarterly performance metrics in my corner office, overlooking Scottsdale's McDowell Mountains, Sarah knocked and entered without waiting for permission, her expression suggesting news that would change everything. "James Mitchell from TechCorp Industries wants to meet," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "He's flying down from Portland specifically to discuss what he called a strategic opportunity that could benefit both companies." TechCorp wasn't a name I'd expected to hear. They were an established player in supply chain management, the kind of traditional technology company that had dominated logistics, software before artificial intelligence revolutionized the industry. Their client roster included major retailers across the Pacific Northwest, built through decades of relationship management and corporate partnerships. "What kind of strategic opportunity?" I asked, though something in Sarah's tone suggested she already knew more than she was revealing. Sarah pulled out her laptop and opened a presentation she'd clearly prepared in advance. "TechCorp has been struggling to compete with next-generation logistics platforms," she said. "Their systems are functional but outdated, requiring extensive customization for each client implementation. They're losing market share to companies like us that can offer real-time optimization and predictive analytics." The presentation outlined TechCorp's financial position with the kind of detailed analysis that suggested Sarah had been researching this opportunity for weeks. Revenue declining 15% annually over the past 3 years. Client retention dropping as major retailers migrated to more sophisticated platforms. Development costs increasing while innovation lagged behind industry standards. "But here's the interesting part," Sarah continued, clicking to a slide that made my breath catch. "TechCorp manages the primary contract relationships for Microsoft's enterprise logistics partnerships. They serve as the intermediary between Microsoft's platform development teams and major retail clients handling implementation and ongoing support services." The implications hit me immediately. David's team at Microsoft didn't work directly with end clients. They developed logistics solutions that TechCorp then customized and deployed for specific corporate customers. If TechFlow acquired TechCorp, we wouldn't just be buying a struggling software company. We'd be gaining oversight of the contract relationships that determined how Microsoft's logistics platform reached the market. I spent the rest of that week in due diligence meetings, reviewing TechCorp's financials and client contracts with the kind of intensity I'd once reserved for debugging critical system failures. James Mitchell proved to be exactly what I'd expected from a traditional technology executive, competent, experienced, and deeply aware that his company's relevance was fading in an industry increasingly dominated by artificial intelligence and real-time optimization. Our initial meeting took place at TechCorp's Phoenix satellite office, a modest space in a business park that felt dated compared to TechFlow's modern headquarters. James was in his mid-40s, graying at the temples, with the slightly desperate energy of someone trying to position a declining asset as a valuable opportunity. "TechFlow has built something remarkable," he said during our first conversation. "Your platform represents the future of logistics optimization, while our company represents established relationships and proven implementation expertise. Together, we could dominate the enterprise market in ways that neither company could achieve independently." The business logic was sound, but I found myself distracted by personal implications I couldn't ignore. Acquiring TechCorp would give TechFlow indirect influence over Microsoft's logistics partnerships, effectively positioning my company as a gatekeeper for the solutions David's team was trying to bring to market. Over the following weeks, as negotiations progressed and deal terms took shape, I wrestled with ethical questions that had no clear answers. Was this legitimate business strategy or personal revenge disguised as corporate development? Did it matter that David would be professionally affected by decisions I made for purely strategic reasons? Sarah argued that business considerations should outweigh family dynamics. TechCorp represents exactly the kind of acquisition opportunity we've been seeking, she said during one of our late-night strategy sessions. Established client relationships, proven implementation expertise, and immediate access to enterprise customers who've been reluctant to work directly with newer companies like ours. The financial analysis supported her position. TechCorp's client contracts were worth significantly more than their declining revenue suggested, representing relationships built over decades with retailers who valued stability, and established support networks. Their customer list included companies that had been unresponsive to TechFlow's direct sales approaches, viewing us as too small or too new to handle enterprise-level implementations. By early December, we'd reached preliminary agreement on an acquisition price of $180 million, a figure that reflected TechCorp's strategic value rather than their current financial performance. The deal would give TechFlow immediate access to Fortune 500 clients while providing TechCorp's shareholders with liquidity from what had become an increasingly difficult market position. But the negotiations also revealed details that complicated my feelings about the acquisition. TechCorp's contract with Microsoft represented nearly 40% of their annual revenue, making them essentially dependent on the success of David's logistics platform. If Microsoft decided to discontinue their enterprise logistics partnerships or develop direct client relationships, TechCorp's value would collapse overnight. James mentioned during one meeting that Microsoft had been conducting quarterly reviews of their partnership agreements, evaluating whether external implementation services were still necessary as their platform matured. The reviews were apparently led by senior software architects, including someone named David Rodriguez, whose team was responsible for logistics platform development. Learning that David was directly involved in decisions that could affect TechCorp's future added another layer of complexity to the acquisition. If the deal proceeded, my company would own the contracts that David's team was evaluating for potential termination. The professional relationship between my brother and me would become inextricably linked to TechFlow's strategic success. During a family video call in mid-December, David mentioned increased pressure at Microsoft to streamline partnership, relationships, and reduce dependency on external implementation services. His comments were casual, part of normal family conversation about work stress and year-end deadlines, but they confirmed what I'd learned through TechCorp's financial disclosures. The logistics platform my team built is performing well enough that management is questioning whether we still need intermediary companies for client implementation, David said. We might be moving toward direct corporate relationships that could simplify our support structure and improve profit margins. I stayed quiet during that conversation, but internally I was calculating the implications. If Microsoft terminated their TechCorp partnership, the acquisition would still be valuable for other client relationships, but the strategic importance would shift significantly. David was unknowingly describing decisions that could directly impact the success of my biggest business deal. By December 20th, all legal documentation was finalized and signed. TechFlow would acquire TechCorp Industries for $180 million, with the transaction closing December 26th and a press embargo until that date to avoid holiday news cycle interference. The acquisition represented more than financial success. It positioned TechFlow as a legitimate enterprise solution provider, gave us immediate access to Fortune 500 client relationships, and established our artificial intelligence platform as a serious competitor to traditional logistics software. But it also meant that Christmas dinner would be the last time David and I gathered as family members with completely separate professional lives. After December 26, we'd be connected through business relationships that neither of us had anticipated when we chose our respective career paths. The irony wasn't lost on me that the biggest deal in TechFlow's history would be announced the day after Christmas, when families traditionally celebrate togetherness and shared values. Everything was about to change, and only I knew it. December 23rd arrived with the crisp, cloudless sky that made Arizona winters feel like a gift from somewhere much colder. I sat in my Tesla outside TechFlow's Scottsdale headquarters, staring at the final acquisition documents displayed on my phone screen. James Mitchell's electronic signature had been added at 11:47 a.m. Pacific Time. The deal was done, $180 million, the largest acquisition in TechFlow's history. The press release was scheduled for December 26th at 9 a.m., giving us 3 days to prepare for the media attention that would follow. I drove slowly through familiar neighborhoods toward my parents' house, taking the long route past ASU where I'd started and abandoned my traditional education, past the Target where I'd worked retail while teaching myself to code, past the small business park where TechFlow had occupied its first real office space. The journey felt symbolic, a reminder of how far I'd traveled from those uncertain early days. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia, my 19-year-old cousin who'd been majoring in computer science at ASU until family pressure began mounting for her to switch to something more practical. Uncle Miguel and Dad have been tag-teaming me about changing majors again. Her message read, "They think business administration would be more stable for women. I'm stressed about telling them I want to stay in CS." The text added weight to an already emotional day. Here was another generation of Rodriguez women facing the same skepticism about pursuing technology careers, the same family dynamics that had shaped my own unconventional path. Sophia needed to see that success in tech was possible, that taking risks could lead to extraordinary outcomes. I pulled into my parents' driveway behind David's rental car, a modest sedan that reflected Microsoft's corporate travel policies. Through the living room window, I could see him gesturing animatedly while Dad listened with the rapt attention he'd always reserved for his son's professional achievements. The house was transformed for Christmas in ways that remained unchanged from my childhood. Luminarias lined the walkway, their soft candlelight creating patterns on the desert landscaping Mom had carefully maintained for decades. The scent of roasting turkey mixed with fresh tamales drifted from the kitchen, where 3 generations of Rodriguez women were probably coordinating the final meal preparations. David met me at the front door, pulling me into a hug that felt different from our usual family greetings. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes more pronounced than they'd been during Thanksgiving. The stress of Microsoft's partnership reviews and corporate restructuring was clearly taking a toll. "How was your flight?" I asked as we walked toward the kitchen. "Delayed 2 hours in Seattle," he said, running a hand through hair that looked like he'd been doing that frequently. Then turbulence over Nevada that had me questioning my life choices. "I'm just glad to be here for a few days away from corporate pressure." The admission suggested David was struggling more than he'd revealed during our Thanksgiving conversations. I wanted to offer support, but how could I explain that his professional challenges were about to become significantly more complicated without revealing the acquisition that would reshape both our careers in the kitchen? I found Abuela Carmen supervising tamale preparation with the commanding presence of someone who'd perfected these traditions over 7 decades. She looked up when I entered, her sharp eyes immediately assessing my emotional state with the accuracy that came from knowing me since birth. "Mija," she said, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron before embracing me. "You carry big news today. I can see it in your shoulders. The way you hold yourself when something important is about to happen." Her observation was uncomfortably accurate. Abuela had always possessed an almost supernatural ability to read family members' unspoken concerns, to sense when major changes were approaching even before the people involved fully understood the implications. Mom emerged from the pantry carrying serving dishes that had been part of Christmas celebrations since I was a child. The familiar sight of red and green pottery, carefully preserved through decades of holiday gatherings, reminded me that some things remained constant even as everything else shifted around them. "Emma, baby mom," said, her voice warm with genuine affection. "David's been telling us about Microsoft's year-end projects. Such important work building technology platforms for major corporations. You should ask him about the logistics systems his team is developing." The suggestion felt loaded with irony I couldn't acknowledge. David's logistics systems were exactly what TechFlow had been competing against for the past 2 years. The enterprise solutions we'd been systematically outperforming with superior artificial intelligence and real-time optimization capabilities. David launched into a detailed explanation of Microsoft's partnership strategies while I helped arrange tamales in serving containers. His description of corporate logistics development sounded increasingly defensive, emphasizing stability and established infrastructure in ways that suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as his audience. "The enterprise market requires proven solutions," he said, gesturing with a wooden spoon he'd picked up from the counter. "Companies like Microsoft have the resources and experience to handle Fortune 500 implementations that smaller firms simply can't manage reliably." I stayed quiet, but internally I was calculating how dramatically his perspective would shift. In 72 hours, when he learned that his little sister's company had acquired oversight of the very partnerships he was describing as unassailable corporate advantages. Cousin Sophia arrived that afternoon with Uncle Miguel, her energy subdued in ways that suggested ongoing family pressure about her academic choices. She hugged me with relief that felt desperate, as if I represented the only family member who understood her aspirations. "Emma," she said quietly while we arranged Christmas decorations, "I need to talk to you about school." Dad and Grandpa keep insisting that computer science is too competitive for women, that I should focus on business management or healthcare administration instead. The conversation felt like an echo of arguments I'd had with Dad 15 years earlier. The same concerns about practical career choices and realistic expectations that had shaped my decision to leave college and pursue programming through unconventional methods. What do you think about their advice? I asked, though I already knew her answer from the frustration in her voice. I think they're wrong, Sophia said with quiet determination. I love coding. I'm good at advanced mathematics, and I want to build software that solves real problems. But it's hard to stay confident when your own family keeps questioning whether you're capable of succeeding. Her words reminded me of my own early doubts, the constant second-guessing that came from pursuing goals that family members couldn't understand or support. Sophia needed encouragement, but she also needed evidence that women could succeed in technology despite skepticism from people who claimed to want what was best for them. That evening, as extended family gathered for Christmas Eve dinner, I found myself caught between anticipation and anxiety about the revelation that would reshape everyone's understanding of my professional achievements. David dominated conversation with stories about Microsoft's corporate culture, while I listened and calculated how those same stories would sound when filtered through the knowledge that his partnerships now fell under TechFlow's strategic oversight. The weight of the secret felt almost unbearable, especially watching Dad's pride in David's conventional success while continuing to view my entrepreneurial achievements as interesting but ultimately risky endeavors that might disappear as quickly as they'd appeared. Abuela caught my eye across the dinner table, her expression suggesting she understood more about my internal conflict than I'd revealed to anyone. Her knowing smile reminded me that she'd invested in TechFlow not just for financial returns, but to prove that Rodriguez women could build empires when given the opportunity to pursue their ambitions without traditional limitations. As Christmas Eve concluded and family members began preparing for the next day's celebration, I realized this would be the last time we'd gather with the existing dynamic intact. Tomorrow's dinner would mark the beginning of a fundamentally different chapter in family relationships, professional recognition, and the ongoing negotiation between traditional expectations and unconventional achievements. Everything was about to change, and I was the only person who knew it. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Arizona winter day that made tourists understand why people moved to the desert. I woke early in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the same furniture and family photos that had anchored my adolescence, but feeling fundamentally different from the person who'd grown up in this space. The acquisition documents were finalized. The press release was loaded and scheduled. In 36 hours, everything would change. I helped Mom prepare the dining room while David slept off what he'd described as the worst work year of his career. The table looked exactly as it had for every Christmas dinner of my childhood. Mom's best china inherited from her mother, cloth napkins folded into precise triangles, poinsettias arranged around candles that cast warm light across family, photographs spanning 4 decades. The extended family began arriving around noon. Uncle Miguel brought Sophia, who looked nervous about the ongoing pressure to change her major. Aunt Rosa came with her husband and 2 teenage sons, who spent most family gatherings absorbed in their phones. Cousins and second cousins filled the house with conversation in English and Spanish, the familiar blend of languages that had soundtracked every celebration I could remember. David emerged from his room looking slightly better than he had the night before, though the stress lines around his eyes remained pronounced. He threw himself into family conversation with what seemed like relief, as if Christmas dinner represented a temporary escape from professional pressures he couldn't resolve. Dad called everyone to the table at exactly 2 o'clock, maintaining the punctuality that had structured our family gatherings for as long as I could remember. We stood for his traditional blessing, heads bowed while he thanked God for family health and the opportunities America had provided 3 generations of Rodriguez immigrants. The meal began with familiar rituals. Dad carved turkey with ceremony, while Mom supervised the flow of side dishes. From kitchen to table, conversations started with polite updates about work and health before settling into the comfortable rhythm of shared memories and gentle family gossip. When attention turned to career updates, David seized the opportunity to describe Microsoft's logistics platform development with enthusiasm that felt slightly forced. He gestured with his fork while explaining enterprise partnerships and corporate infrastructure advantages, his voice carrying the confidence of someone trying to convince himself as much as his audience. The logistics market is incredibly complex, he said, looking around the table to ensure everyone was following his explanation. Companies like Microsoft have the established relationships and technical expertise to handle Fortune 500 implementations that smaller firms simply can't manage reliably. I stayed quiet, cutting my turkey with more attention than necessary, while internally calculating how that statement would sound in 48 hours when TechCorp's announcement revealed the actual competitive landscape. Uncle Miguel asked about my business with the polite interest family members show when they don't really understand what someone does for work. Before I could answer, Dad jumped in with his familiar explanation. Emma runs a small computer company here in Phoenix, he said, his tone carrying the gentle condescension I'd learned to expect. It's doing well for what it is, but nothing like the scale David works with at Microsoft. Different markets entirely. The dismissal stung exactly as it always did, but this time I felt something new underneath the familiar hurt. Tonight would be the last time Dad could minimize my achievements through ignorance. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a fundamentally different conversation about success and recognition within our family. "How's your little computer business going, mija?" Dad asked directly, his voice warm with paternal affection, but tinged with the assumptions that had shaped his understanding of my career for over a decade. I opened my mouth to respond, but David interrupted with additional context about the challenges facing small technology companies in competitive markets. His explanation was technically accurate, but missed the scale and sophistication of what TechFlow had become. "Sophia's more on the consulting side of technology," David said, his voice carrying the authority of someone explaining a field he understood better than his audience. "She works with local businesses on basic optimization problems, very different from the enterprise-level solutions we develop at Microsoft." The characterization was so far from reality that I almost laughed. TechFlow was processing logistics for companies that competed directly with Microsoft's enterprise clients, using artificial intelligence algorithms that David's team couldn't replicate with their current technical constraints. But I remained silent, watching family members nod with understanding that was completely disconnected from the actual scope of my professional achievements. This dynamic had shaped family gatherings for years, positioning David as the technology expert whose corporate experience qualified him to interpret my entrepreneurial work for relatives who understood neither path. Abuela Carmen had been listening quietly from her seat at the head of the table, occasionally checking the vintage watch that had belonged to my grandfather. At 8:45 p.m., she set down her fork with deliberate precision and looked directly at Dad. "Roberto," she said, using his full name in the tone she reserved for important family discussions, "you mentioned that success in technology requires corporate backing and established infrastructure. What about companies that build valuable technology that major corporations want to acquire?" Dad nodded confidently, pleased to be asked about a topic where he felt authoritative. "Exactly," he said. "The real measure of success in technology is building something valuable, enough that established companies like Microsoft recognize its worth and want to integrate it into their platforms." David agreed enthusiastically, describing acquisition strategies and partnership development as the ultimate validation for smaller technology companies. He spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned the assumptions underlying his corporate worldview. "That makes perfect sense," Abuela said, glancing at her watch again. "Emma, didn't you mention something recently about your company completing a major business transaction?" The question hung in the air like a bridge between my old family identity and the reality I'd been building in private. Every eye at the table turned toward me with polite interest, expecting another modest update about local business development or small client acquisitions. My phone buzzed with a notification at exactly 9 p.m. The press release had gone live. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. TechFlow completed the acquisition of TechCorp Industries yesterday. The announcement just went public. David's expression shifted from polite interest to confusion as he pulled out his phone to search for news about a company he'd never heard me mention. The table remained quiet while he read his face cycling through disbelief, shock, and something that looked like professional panic. "TechCorp Industries," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's the company that manages Microsoft's enterprise logistics partnerships. They handle implementation and client relationships for our entire platform. The room erupted in questions I'd been waiting years to answer, voices overlapping as family members tried to understand how their assumptions about my modest business success had been so completely wrong. But David's reaction captured my attention completely. He was staring at his phone screen, reading details about an acquisition that fundamentally altered his professional landscape, realizing that his little sister's company now held strategic oversight of partnerships his team depended on for market access. The moment felt like vindication and victory and family reconciliation, all compressed into a single instant of recognition that would reshape everything that followed. The silence that followed David's stunned announcement stretched across the dining room like a held breath. Family members sat frozen forks halfway to mouths, trying to process information that didn't align with anything they thought they knew about my professional life. Abuela Carmen continued her gentle interrogation, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting years for this exact moment. So, success in technology means building something valuable enough that established companies recognize its worth, she repeated, glancing at her watch as it approached 9 p.m. Roberto, you've always said the real measure of achievement is creating technology that major corporations want to integrate into their operations. Dad nodded emphatically, still confident in his assessment, despite the growing confusion around the table. Exactly, Mama. That's why David's work at Microsoft represents real success. Corporate backing, established infrastructure, proven market value. That's what separates serious technology companies from hobby projects that might disappear overnight. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his phone still displaying the TechCorp acquisition announcement that had fundamentally altered his understanding of both our family dynamics and his professional landscape. But he remained quiet, processing implications he wasn't ready to discuss in front of relatives who didn't understand the competitive complexities of enterprise software development. Abuela's vintage watch ticked toward 9 p.m. with the precision that had marked important moments throughout my childhood. She'd used that same timepiece to coordinate tamale preparation, to ensure Christmas dinner started punctually, to mark the passage of hours during family celebrations that stretched across decades. Emma, she said, turning toward me with the knowing smile I'd learned to recognize whenever she was about to reveal information that would surprise the rest of the family. Didn't your company just complete that major business transaction we discussed? Privately. The question hung in the air while my phone buzzed with the notification I'd been anticipating all day. TechCrunch's push alert glowed on my screen. TechFlow Solutions acquires TechCorp Industries for $180, featuring my photograph as CEO, alongside analysis of how the deal would reshape enterprise logistics partnerships. I set my phone on the table, face up so everyone could see the headline that changed everything. Actually, TechFlow completed the acquisition of TechCorp Industries yesterday. I said, my voice carrying a calmness that surprised me. The press release just went public. David's face drained of color as he read the announcement more carefully, his engineering mind calculating the professional implications faster than the rest of the family could understand the basic facts. TechCorp manages the implementation partnerships for Microsoft's entire logistics platform, he said quietly, more to himself than to the room. They handle our client relationships, our market access, our revenue stream. The table erupted in overlapping questions as family members tried to bridge the gap between their assumptions about my modest computer business and the reality of what TechFlow had become. Uncle Miguel asked about employee count. Aunt Rosa wanted to know about revenue figures. Cousin Sophia stared at me with something approaching awe. 150 employees across offices in Phoenix, Austin, and Toronto, I explained patiently. 85 million in annual revenue. We process logistics optimization for major retailers, including Nike, Walmart, and Target. Our artificial intelligence platform handles over $2 billion in supply chain decisions annually. The numbers seemed to bounce off polite smiles and confused expressions. Dad sat with his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips, trying to reconcile these figures with his understanding of what constituted legitimate business success. Papa, I continued, looking directly at him across the table surrounded by the Christmas decorations that had anchored our family celebrations for decades. My hobby business now provides strategic oversight for the enterprise, partnerships that David's Microsoft team depends on for market access. Mom's eyes filled with tears as the magnitude of what I'd achieved began to register. She'd spent years offering gentle encouragement for what she believed was a small local business, never imagining that her daughter was building something that competed with the corporate giants she'd been taught to respect. Uncle Miguel started laughing, a sound that combined vindication with genuine amazement. All those family dinners where we talked about stable careers and corporate security, he said, shaking his head. Emma was building an empire while we worried about her taking risks. Sophia leaned forward with questions that tumbled over each other in excitement. How did you learn to build something this big? What advice would you give someone starting in computer science? Can women really succeed in technology? Despite what everyone says about the industry being too competitive, her enthusiasm reminded me of my own early hunger for validation, the desperate need to prove that unconventional choices could lead to extraordinary outcomes. But it also highlighted the generational impact of what had happened tonight. Sophia would never again hear family arguments about women being unsuited for technology careers without pointing to her cousin's success as counter-evidence. David finally spoke, his voice carrying a complexity of emotions I couldn't fully interpret. Emma. I had no idea, he said. All this time when I was describing the competitive challenges my team faces, I was talking about your company without realizing it. The logistics solutions we've been trying to match, the artificial intelligence capabilities we can't replicate, the client relationships we've been losing to more innovative platforms. The admission represented more than professional acknowledgement. David was recognizing that his little sister had succeeded in the exact field where he'd built his identity, using approaches he dismissed as unsustainable startup thinking. But the conversation I'd been waiting for was with Dad, whose traditional mindset had shaped every family discussion about career, choices, and professional success for as long as I could remember. Papa, I said, my voice carrying the weight of 15 years of seeking approval. I'd finally learned I didn't need. I never needed you to understand my business model or technical architecture. I needed you to believe in me the way Abuela did, to trust that I could build something meaningful even when the path looked uncertain. Dad set down his wineglass with shaking hands, his eyes reflecting the emotional complexity of a parent realizing he'd fundamentally misunderstood his child's capabilities. Mija, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I was trying to protect you from disappointment, from the risk of failure in a field I thought was too competitive, too unstable for someone starting without traditional advantages. I know, I replied, reaching across the table to cover his hand with mine. But protection from failure also meant protection from the possibility of extraordinary success. Abuela Carmen raised her own glass, the crystal-catching candlelight in patterns that reminded me of countless Christmas celebrations where dreams were shared and achievements were recognized. To Emma, she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose investment had exceeded every possible expectation. And to proving that Rodriguez women can build empires when we believe in ourselves and each other. The toast that followed felt like redemption and validation and family, reconciliation compressed into a single moment of recognition. David raised his glass with genuine respect. Mom cried happy tears while asking detailed questions about company operations she'd never thought to investigate. Dad struggled with emotions that would take time to fully process but began that night with simple acknowledgement of achievements he could no longer dismiss. As Christmas dinner concluded and family members prepared to leave, Sophia pulled me aside for a private conversation that reminded me why tonight's revelation mattered beyond personal vindication. Thank you, she said simply, for proving that women can succeed in technology despite family skepticism, for showing that taking risks can lead to extraordinary outcomes, for giving me evidence I can cite when people question my academic choices. The conversation reminded me that success isn't just about personal achievement. It's about opening doors for the next generation, about proving that unconventional paths can lead to destinations that traditional thinking never imagined possible. If you've ever had to prove yourself to a family who doubted your dreams, share your story in the comments below. Hit subscribe for more inspiring stories of turning doubt into determination, and let me know what would you say to someone who dismissed your biggest achievement. And this community is here to celebrate every victory, big and small.